Next, I'd like to introduce Concetta Tomaino. She's the executive director and co-founder of the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function in Mount Vernon, New York. Beginning in the 1980s, when Dr. Oliver Sacks observed how music, especially rhythm, as you've seen, could reanimate those with Parkinson's-like movement disorders, he and Dr. Tomaino searched for answers together. Internationally recognized for her research and clinical applications of music and neurologic rehabilitation, she is the past president of the American Association for Music Therapy and has been honored at the United Nations with the Music Therapists for Peace Award of Accomplishment. I first met Connie about 12 years ago when I had just finished working on my book, What Should I Do with the Rest of My Life? And had been stunned by the learning that was done by a dancer in his late 50s and became an amazing dancer with the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange, and had wanted to work on a book on the brain and dance. And I talked and interviewed Concetta at that time, and she was incredibly generous then and is being generous again with her time to take time to present to us today. So I welcome you and greatly appreciate your willingness to do this and look forward to your presentation, Connie. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for inviting me to be here, and especially after all the presentations. Already we've learned something about what's known about music in the brain, and I'd like to continue with that and actually talk about the field that I'm in, the field of music therapy, because it takes what we know about music and health and music and how it affects human function, but then uses the music to help people who have either neurologic problems or people who are developing differently that could be enhanced through the mechanisms of music. As you mentioned, Bruce, that when Oliver and I started working together in the early 80s, I had already worked in a nursing home for 2 years prior to that, and was working with people with end stages of dementia. And I tell this story a lot because it's so poignant that back then people with end stages of dementia would be basically in a closed ward almost, hooked up to tubes or feeding tubes and not able to move, over medicated because of agitation and other types of behaviors. I was told that those people didn't have any brains left, that there was nothing possible that they could recognize because of the severe damage. And yet when I played the familiar song, people with agitation calmed down. People started singing words to songs. And all I could think of, I had a background in science, and all I could think of is, how does somebody with such a damaged brain, how does their brain process vibrations in the air? How does their brain understand that this was a melody that they recognize? How do they recall the words to a song if they didn't have brains that were functional? And so that became my journey in trying to understand how and why music evokes recognition in people who seem to have lost memory, and how it allows access to preserve function in people who have been deemed to have lost that function forever. And then in 1980, I had the chance of, I gotta move this out of the way so you can see my slides. Had the chance, of course, of meeting Oliver Sacks, and the facility where I was hired to do music therapy was the facility where awakenings took place. And Oliver had already had this incredible experience of seeing people who couldn't move, who could be animated to movement through music, and specifically rhythm, as you've just heard, the importance of that in exciting neurons in the brain. Back then, we didn't know what was going on because there was nothing being written about it or studied about it. In fact, Oliver and I had gone to neuroscientists in the early 80s to see if we could have them study music in the brain. There was some studies happening in different labs at the beginnings of auditory perception, how pitch is processed in the right temporal lobe and things like, but even that was new. There was nothing that could tell us how somebody who seemingly had lost function forever could get that function back in the context of a music experience. And so we started working together, obviously very closely, because we both worked at the same facility for 35 years. And because I had the luxury of being a paid full-time music therapist at this facility, I was working with these individuals every day. And when you work, you've seen the effects of music, like with the video of Henry. I actually helped start that music and memory program. How somebody who can be excited and brought to the moment in the context of music. And Oliver even used to say, it used to use a word of T.S. Eliot, you are the music while the music lasts. Because in his experience, when the music stopped, the person went back to where they were. But because of the luxury of my being able to work every day with these individuals, people started to improve. People who had strokes, who couldn't speak, were saying words that they couldn't say before. They were stringing together phrases and sentences. People who only had limited movement or could only move to music because of Parkinson's, were becoming more flexible and more independent in their movement. So something was happening. And it was the beginnings of our understanding of neuroplasticity and how when these neurons get excited simultaneously and start engaging other parts of the brain into action again, we see the return of function. And so that led us, with the help of the board of directors at the hospital, to create the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function, which back in the early 90s was the beginning of dialogues across disciplines with some of the early neuroscientists, Robert Satori and Annie Patel and some others, to help us to start to understand why music, of all things, is so effective and so powerful in reaching functionality in people who seem to have lost it. And so we've already seen some of this. The thing with music is that in order for us to process a song, almost every part of the brain has to be engaged. And so if you can imagine somebody who has some functional deficits, that if there's enough networks that are engaged in that music making or that music recall, we can excite and energize and recruit other areas of the brain to respond again. So there's been quite a bit of research in the past 15 years about the different localizations of some specifics about music, but what we know is that these networks intertwine and interact and can be called upon in the context of rhythm perception, melodic perception, emotional regulation, and all of that. And what music therapists do is they learn the nuances of music and human behavior, nuances of music and neurologic function, and the psychodynamic properties of music, so we can use it clinically to help people enhance function. And that could be in wellness. That can, anybody can pick up a musical instrument and engage in music. Anybody can make a playlist of their favorite songs and listen to that and enhance their quality of life. But some people can't do that on their own. And some people maybe get stuck. I often think of, analogies to other disciplines that are specialists. So you think of a dietitian, everybody eats every day, but if we have allergies or if we have struggled with food, we'll go to a specialist like a dietitian to help us understand how we have to change how we approach our use of food. In music therapy, we're trained to use music in a very dynamic, interactive way to assess and to treat through different aspects of music, whether it's rhythm or melody or the whole song, to address very specific clinical needs. And I think the reason, Bruce, when we were talking about this presentation, is that many of you are the people on this presentation, as well as the people listening, is they may not be aware that the field of music therapy exists. Maybe they do. But the fact is they can get access to music therapy to help when music in and of itself doesn't seem to be working. What's going on? How can I do this better? Why does this song not work? Why does this person get agitated when they hear a song? A person with Parkinson's disease who is responding to rhythm but somehow gets stuck. What's going on? And music therapists are trained to do that and to help with carryover in that discipline. We work with mental health and well-being. Many music therapists work with veterans. We ourselves have a veterans program. We work with a lot of senior groups to help with emotional regulation, to help to alleviate depression and isolation. And so not in the context of just making the music, because that in and of itself is very important and key to what we do, but as a music therapist, seeing where the person gets stuck, seeing where they're not fully expressing themselves, seeing where they may have some sadness related to something that maybe they haven't been able to verbalize and express. And can we use the music to help them get to the point of being able to express that so they can free themselves emotionally and move toward a sense of wellness and well-being. This woman is a veteran who has an amazing voice, loves to sing, is an amazing jazz and Latin singer. But because of an injury, when she was deployed, she has some cognitive short-term and attention issues. And for her, music allows her to improve that function. Having to remember lyrics to a song, having to remember where to come in, all improve her cognitive ability and attention. Things like emotional regulation and resilience. We saw a wonderful slide about dyslexia and how music can help somebody improve their dyslexia. We know that, for example, children who have language delays actually have impaired rhythm perception. And the reason why they can't learn language is because their brain isn't parsing the nuances of sound, because when we speak in a continuous sound. And for the person to understand where those breaks between the words are, where there's a beginning of a word start and the end, is all dependent on our perception of rhythm. And even though technically we're all born with rhythm perception, there's actually been good studies of that show a fetus even before birth already starts to have this kind of memory and auditory processing. And upon birth has something called beat perception. And the reason for that is so that the infant upon birth can start parsing and understanding languages and changes in the environment. Well, we can use rhythm to then help in early childhood development, the acquisition of language when that's been delayed. So, similarly, there's a whole, it's such a breadth, and you've seen some of them already, of ways that music can be used therapeutically to help these individuals. People with aphasia, especially Broca's aphasia, non-fluent aphasia, where a certain part of the left part of the temporal lobe in Broca's area has been damaged because of a lesion due to the stroke. Those individuals usually cannot put words together fluently. They may they struggle in speaking and being able to communicate. Many of them can sing, and the phenomena was that you can get a person with aphasia to sing a song, but they couldn't say a sentence. And the understanding years ago was that that would never carry over into fluent speech. Now we know that if you can get the person to sing and sing in a very sort of sing-song type way, that over time, there's a compensatory mechanism that gets enhanced in the right temporal lobe. And those individuals actually do reacquire the ability to speak and put together words. So in music therapy, we'll use these nuances of pitch, melody, and words embedded in song as a way of stimulating and priming or warming up and arousing parallel networks of language function that are still preserved, that can be called upon, then hopefully get carried over into speech. We heard a little bit about rhythm and Parkinson's. We know that the auditory system has incredible connections to some of the premotor areas, premotor neurons. So when a motor neuron gets excited through an auditory pulse, it actually stimulates the release of dopamine that allows from the inside the initiation of motor function that the person themselves can initiate on their own. So music therapists will use rhythm in the context of rehab to allow the person to enhance their gait, enhance their balance. People with stroke and TBI, we may be using the music to help them get more flexibility and more movement in the affected side, again, all through rhythm-based programs. I spoke a little bit about using music groups to help reduce isolation, but for many seniors, being able to engage with other people is so important. For all of us to be able to be connected to other people is so crucial and so important. When you lose language, when you lose speech, when you lose the ability to interact verbally because of a traumatic brain injury, we could still share music with each other. We can still express a connection and belonging to each other. And that can happen through music. It can happen through the fundamentals of what music means in our world, in our society. So making music together is one of the basic elements of social engagement that's still available to us, despite possible health issues or injury. A lot of music therapists now work in end-of-life care and in pain management in hospitals. In fact, pediatric music therapy is one of the fastest growing areas because of how music can help with things like pain management, dealing with emotional aspects of injury and loss. And music therapy and hospice care can help families as well as the person in hospice deal with end-of-life issues and share feelings and sentiments with each other that maybe verbally they can't feel comfortable doing on their own. So music helps with both the pain management as well as some of the psychological issues related to end of life. We've actually worked with people, and a lot of music therapists do this. They'll actually create a playlist that the person in hospice then passes on to their family and grandchildren as a way of remembering them and sharing their heritage and their love of music. So there's so many ways that music can be used beyond just like treatment, but to enhance life. And then also using music to help care partners support people who are caring for those with dementia, Alzheimer's, different kinds of injuries, helping them deal with some of the emotional issues, the struggles, the things that they're dealing with every day, so they can help, so they can themselves get out some of the frustration, the stress, the anxiety, all those things, so then they can help in a more successful way. There is some not side effects, but things that we are very conscious of about music that can elicit negative responses that can actually be damaging to people. And in fact, some of the neurologic problems that we deal with, say for people who have frontal temporal dementia, where there's actually a change in the temporal lobes of the brain, those individuals may actually have their perception of music change to the point that they don't actually hear melodies or notes anymore. Those frequencies have been damaged, and they may hear static or noise or clanging or whatever. And so a person, if you're caring for somebody who has Alzheimer's and dementia, and they have negative responses to music that should have been pleasing to them, it could be that they have altered perceptual states. and that they're not actually able to hear that music, and it can also cause some anxiety. And then there's also the negative or negative emotional attachments we may have, associations we may have to music, that if a person listens to it, it may put them into a regressive state. So if having them pull back psychologically because the music is so traumatic. So in those cases, we're very conscious of looking at responses. We can't assume that just because a song was something that somebody loved, or that in their age group, everybody liked a certain song, for that particular person, that song may have negative and very emotionally rich negative connotations, and they may actually get more depressed because of those connotations. So we're very, very conscious about how deeply effective music can be, both negatively and positively. And so music therapists are very careful about assessing and analyzing that. So this is a woman with Parkinson's. This is a woman who has something called bradykinesia, where she has very slowness. She has a one side seems more affected than the other. She needs an aid to walk. She shuffles. Has a festinating type of gait. But when the music plays, you'll see a dramatic change. And this is a really good example of how music is able to affect that. It's very low in the beginning, but hopefully you can hear it if you still.
Probably facing the other way.
You can see how she's shuffling, holding on so she can. Making the turn to the person with Parkinson's very good. Absolutely, absolutely perfect.
Amazing.
So, just like some quick examples of that you saw of how music therapy can be effective. If people want to learn more about music therapy, or they're interested, maybe they have a family member who could benefit, whether it's a child or somebody who may have been in a car accident, or maybe somebody who's depressed and needs help. The Certification Board for Music Therapists, cbmt.org. You could look up in your state where MTBC, Music Therapist Board Certified, is the standard for music therapy in the United States. You can find somebody in your area. The American Music Therapy Association also has a registry of where you can find music therapists. My institute also provides consultation, advisement, and help with organizations trying to use the elements of music therapy to enhance the types of programs that we're doing. So for example, I work with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra here in New York in helping and the Midori Foundation in helping them develop their programs in a more therapeutic way to address needs across age groups and disabilities and abilities to enhance those programs. The Music and Memory Program is something that I helped start. That's the international program that teaches people how to use playlists to help people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and a bunch of other things. So thanks again for allowing me to be here and to share some of the things that we do in music therapy.
Thank you very much, Connie. I greatly appreciate your presentation and overview of all this and all the work you've done over so many years. So thank you. Great, truly appreciate it.